Good morning, everybody. Good morning. We don't have a big meeting. At 9:30, we're going downstairs to the Holocaust Education Center for a tour. We'll split up into two groups. And Jeff will take one group, and whatever, what's her name?
The lady?
The lady will take the other half. Okay? And the meeting will end there. And I guess you can come up for your coats.
Club meeting afterward or no?
Sorry?
We're going to have time for an investment club meeting?
Yes, you will.
Okay.
So you want an investment club meeting? Yes. We just have a few announcements and coming attractions, okay, which we'll get to now. There is a Purim event at the JCC, which Dave Wynn is going to tell us about.
Randy's here. I'll get him to send out the information. The JCC has a Purim event every single year, and it needs people to help run it. Such things as running the popcorn machine, the cotton candy machine, checking people in. It's a fun event. It's a very easy assignment for anybody there, and we're really looking for a good turnout from our club to be there. The event runs from 12:30 to 4:30, 4 weeks from date, so 24th of February. And I believe that, I don't know which day in the week that is, but that maybe
Sunday.
Maybe Sunday, maybe right after our meeting here.
It does coincide with our meeting.
So people can come here and stay. We're looking for volunteers. We hope to have a large number of volunteers. We're going to have Randy send out the information. Somebody needs to coordinate the receipt of that information because I will be in Thailand when that meeting is. But we need to get that information in by next Friday. Whoever is interested, we need to get that information by next Friday so I can send it in, but whoever wants to coordinate volunteers,
I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it.
Jerry will take care of it. And it should be a fun event because there's a lot of good things going on. I think they had 800 people here last year, and I just leave it at that point.
Okay. So we need people in either for 4 hours, 12:30 to 4:30, or in 2-hour segments, which is what I'm going to volunteer for. So 12:30 to 2:30, or 2:30 to 4:30. An email we'll get Randy. Randy, there you are. He'll send out an announcement. Please sign up if you can for 2 hours to volunteer to run a popcorn machine or something. It sounds like a lot of fun and a lot of kids and a lot of fun. Okay? Another announcement. Ed, you got one?
Yeah.
Come on up.
We sent out a Cirque du Soleil email a week or two ago. I didn't get one response, so...
I responded.
Yeah, that's true.
I responded that I'm not coming.
Jerry responded that he's not coming, and Barry Rosenberg said they play softball on Sundays and it might be too early. So that was my total response from all you guys.
So is there any interest? It's an expensive...
Yeah, it's
expensive, but if you have not seen Cirque du Soleil, this is a great opportunity. It is phenomenal. I've seen 3 of them.
It was June 2nd, but it could be they're there for 30 days. They start at the end of May and they end the 3rd week in June or something like that. If anybody's interested, send me an email. If you look back at that other email, my email address is here. Send me an email and tell me you're interested. I think I'm going to go, and I think Barry Adler's going to go. So if I can put 10 people together, I'll put 10 people together. We might not get the discount, but we could still get.
I think last year we talked about possibly going to like Liberty Island and Ellis Island.
Okay, that might have been before my...
Yeah, could have been before.
Okay, Ellis Island?
And, you can
You mean go from Jersey and take the boat over? Okay. When would you want to go, like in the spring? May?
I don't think they're running
June, July, then.
Well, or June.
Yeah.
Something like June? All right.
It's not open.
It's not open, it's not going to be open then?
It was destroyed by the storm. It was had tremendous devastation.
Yeah. I guess we're not going this year. Maybe next year. All right, hey, look, if somebody has an idea for a trip or something, send me an email and
Grounds for sculpture. Grounds for sculpture.
grounds for sculpture, okay. Any-
What? I also have another one, but you have to go on Wednesday, which is the tour of the McGuire Air Force Base.
Let me ask you another question. One of the ones that I have personal interest in is Cedar Run Woodford Wildlife Refuge in Medford, because my daughter's director of education there. They rehabilitate wild animals, Jersey wild animals, deer, and they have eagles, they have hawks, they have owls. They have a hospital there that they rehabilitate them. They have cages, they have captive animals. They have animals that they use for education in the schools. If your kids have been in the Cherry Hill schools, I know that.
A lot of animals in the Cherry Hill School. It's true.
I'd like to do something out there sometime if you guys would be interested. We actually probably could do a Sunday morning breakfast out there in the spring or fall when the weather's nice. I don't know.
Interesting idea.
I don't know if there's any interest. The other thing is she would come here with a couple of her birds and
Really?
show if
Oh, yes.
whoever's.
I like
Who's
that.
the program chairman?
He's not here today, Dave Schwartz.
All right, Dave. All right.
Which does bring up, there is a committee being headed by Bob Greenberg to nominate officers for the next 2 years. That committee is starting to meet soon, and Bob will be trying to round up people who would like to serve on our board. All right, we already have one volunteer to be our next president in Don Weisenstein, but we do want to get participation from a lot more people to be members of our board and do the planning that we do. On an infrequent. Say that again?
I will pay to have someone take my job. That can be arranged. How much? You give me a reasonable amount. You can't afford it if you have to ask. Jerry.
Yes, okay. Don attended a meeting here at the JCC a couple of weeks ago, and about Israel at 65.
About 25 people were there. It was interesting. I think 6 were rabbis, and some came up from Baltimore even, so it's kind of widespread. But most of the meeting was directed at trying to determine what group to bring in as far as entertainment. They have a grant, so they were looking at 3 different professional groups. One they were even thinking of trying to see if they were able to come in from Israel, which was kind of, seemed like a considerable expense. But most of the meeting was viewing their performances on the video and giving suggestions if we want to have those groups or not. Most of the consensus seemed to go to trying to get a college group in to perform rather than spend the money on a professional group. And a lot of the meeting also was trying to coordinate a combined choir from the various synagogues. Now, Jerry had mentioned you heard some other things that I didn't even hear when I was there. So.
The thrust of the effort in the community is for every organization to run 1, 2, or even 3 meetings during the year that focus on Israel, and we're going to try to do that here as well, and learn more about what's going on in Israel, both its history and what's happening today in Israel.
They also mentioned that Jewish Heritage Night at the 76ers is the 14th on a Sunday. They're playing the Cavs, and the Cavs have a Jewish basketball player. I don't know who it is, but they have a Jewish basketball player. Which is kind of neat.
He only dribbles from right to left.
Great crossover there. They did also mention that Philadelphia is having a much bigger Israel 65. They have, I guess, convention hall that they're having, and floats, and much bigger, and that would be in May.
Don, had there been any contact with, like, Israeli consulate to see if they have any people coming in anyway from Israel, any groups?
No. I mean, there's 3 people that look like they were primarily the ones in charge of setting things up, and they were just trying to bounce ideas off us at this meeting. There's another meeting that they said they'll schedule, but they wanted to check on these 3 groups. I don't know, Cole Doty. Cole Doty is a 5-member group.
Okay.
Shock.
Carl Dodi. Okay.
And Shock from Israel. Wanted
So
to,
what happens, Don, is like at the consulate, they would know if a group's coming in and coordinate it with 4, 5, 6, 7 cities.
oh, that should. I'll bring that up when they schedule our next meeting.
Yes, sir, Dave.
This came up in discussion about the speaker for March. He informed me that you're having a meeting in Passover, in the middle of Passover. So the question is, are we going to hold it in the middle of Passover, which obviously means matzah, right, and bagels and all that. And it also affects his ability to speak. So I just want to bring up the thing here. Do you want to hold a meeting on Passover?
Where's Rich?
Here. In front of you.
Is it a problem if we have matzah instead of bread?
Can't do it.
Can't do it.
Can't do it. No. Cannot have a meeting in Passover. It's impossible. Can't do it. No,
Yeah.
it's, you can't, no.
Our religious vice president wired that into it.
Yeah, you can't do
Jerry,
it.
maybe we could do an evening meeting during the week then.
Okay.
Because you can't,
We'll look at-
everything's gotta be kosher for Pesach, you can't do it. You just really shouldn't do it.
All right.
Especially in this building.
So I guess
Have it earlier.
I'll contact Marcy.
March is Mideast Conference, that's going to be probably our meeting anyway in March, right?
Yeah, if I could
March 17th.
speak to that.
Mideast Conference is March 17th?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So then we'll have to say we will not have a regular meeting. We'll just coincide it with the MEI.
It would be 2 weeks later, though. Oh, but that's Passover.
Meet is the 17th. When's the,
We can't do it.
please? We have,
I think it's going to be.
This is normally stuff that we handle within the board, all right, not here at a general meeting.
Dinner meeting that we,
Well, we'll discuss it in the board. Yeah.
Right.
What board?
It may be kind of late, but we'll try. All right, so we'll send out emails when the March meeting will be. Okay? Yes, sir. You want to talk? Well,
you wanted to say?
Well, you first, Mr. JCRC.
Okay, with regard to my representing us at the JCRC, as you know, they're having their tour tonight, this afternoon, or actually right after our meeting at the Holocaust Museum. Representing the JCRC, I was in a kind of a focus group meeting for about 3 hours last week. They were focusing on what are the strengths and weaknesses of the museum. And one of the things I came out with is how much good they're doing with so little resources and so little space. They really do an incredible job. So actually, as you tour the museum later, if you have any suggestions for their future, you give them to me and I'll take them back to the JCRC. I also represent us at the, they call it a campaign cabinet for the fundraising, which includes what we're doing later today with the Super Sunday. I originally sent out an announcement that if you wanted to participate in Super Sunday on the phones or in clerical work, that you had to register. I'm now told that if you haven't done anything yet and you want to participate this afternoon, all you have to do is go downstairs, go to the registration desk, and they'll take you then. For those of you who are a little bit intimidated by the phones, it's really not that difficult. If you're willing to participate, I can give you some guidelines on how to deal with the phones. You're going to get mostly answering machines, which could be a little bit frustrating, but if you just expect that, it's not so tough.
What time does that start?
Actually, it's going to start soon, and we can I signed up for the second shift, but in view of the fact that we're so early today, I'm probably going to go down and do the first shift. If you want any guidelines on how to deal with people on the phone, just see me afterwards and I'll try to walk you through it. But Jerry has made it clear over and over again that we don't donate money, we donate time. And there's an old Jewish expression, you know, if I'm not for me, who will be? You know, if the Jewish community doesn't serve the Jewish community, who will? So I'm going to encourage you to go downstairs later and man the phones. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, Bob, one second though. I'm watching the time. We're supposed to be down there at 9:30. So after Bob, we'll do the 50-50, and then we'll all repair downstairs, okay?
Two things, very quickly. First of all, if there's anybody who wants, you guys done? Thank you. If there's anybody who wants to volunteer for a post on the board, it would save us time, because we're going to go and we're going to try to contact everybody. And this is not just this board, but the board in the next 2 to 4 years, because what we want to do is set up succession. So please contact me, or contact Randy, or contact Richie, okay, if you're interested. Second thing is Mideast Institute. Mideast Institute is March 17th, and we have to start getting our volunteers in order now. I head up the Mideast Institute committee for our group. I also serve on the Mideast Institute board or committee for the JCRC. Speakers are all lined up. The posters have already been sent out. So if you're interested, at the next meeting in February, we'll have a sign-up sheet. And we'll need roughly between 20 and 30 volunteers. So if you're interested, please sign up. And if you have any questions, you can speak to me after the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. That's it. We're going to do the 50-50 as soon as Don gets his items torn up. And
there's also books here.
yes, I want to mention that. There are books. People have brought in books. Take a book, bring a book. If you haven't brought a book, it looks like there's still plenty of books to take if you want to read a book. All right? The worst place for a book is on a bookshelf. The best place for a book is in your hands reading it, or in somebody's hands reading it. And I love this concept of trading books. How you making out there?
I think did we miss anybody who wants to?
It's closed. We got to go. Okay. Since we don't have a guest, I'm going to do it. All right? And we got it. And it's blue. And the number is TICKET.
Everybody wins.
And the number will be in Hebrew. So if you don't know Hebrew, you lose. It's 325 841. And just for you guys, it's 325841.
That's not the right number.
There you go.
Again, a double? You predicted it.
The winning share is $40.
One last week. That's pretty good.
Yes.
Go ahead, Al.
Okay. If there's nothing else, we're meeting downstairs in 2 minutes at the Holocaust Education Center.
Time to take the tray, throw their trash away.
Quick announcement, everybody. Anybody who wants any leftovers, grab some aluminum foil and take what you want.
Okay, guys, thank you.
That's my club meeting after the meeting.
No, you can leave it.
So what I normally say to a group isn't, can you hear me? Because I'm a university professor, so I know how to project my voice. It's usually, can you see me? I am height impaired, so yes, we're good. So what I want to do, we're going to go around the cases in order because of the progression. I just want to say before we start that most of us link the Holocaust with World War II. The Holocaust started before World War II, and the Holocaust started because of hatred. It wasn't part of the war effort. The undertaking by Hitler and the Nazi Party was done way ahead of that, and mostly because of anti-Semitism that was already in place in Eastern and Western Europe. So if you'll come to me to the first case, and our cases are labeled, and I'll let you get closer to the case because I can stand on the side and don't have to be. So, and you can lay your coat on the chair if you'd like. So each of our cases are labeled so that, and if you have a smartphone, we're set up now so that you can start at the case out front. I'll show you that, and then use your smartphone to come in and get an audio explanation of all of the cases. But this is propaganda, identification, and humiliation, which were the first steps that the Nazis took. Propaganda, extremely important to convince the population that what they were doing was necessary and the right thing to do. So initially, making sure that back then you had newspapers, television really wasn't prevalent, so you had a lot of posters throughout towns and villages making sure that the non-Jewish population knew that the Jewish population was a threat to Germany's future and to their present as well. They used even storybooks. So if you see on the left-hand side, it's in German, but translated, it is called The Poison Mushroom. So they would give storybooks to young children portraying the Jews as the enemy, and as our children are taught today that strangers, you need to be aware of strangers, at that time period you needed to be afraid of Jews. So the gentleman, you can see the mushrooms on the front cover, which portray all of the caricatures of that time period displayed the Jewish population with large noses, usually with beards. So you have 5 mushrooms there. All the front of the mushroom has the Star of David on it. On the right-hand top, you have someone who looks very questionable giving out candy to young children. And actually, the middle picture took place in classrooms where they taught children how to identify a Jew, and that this was someone that you really needed to be concerned with. And these are the identifying factors. So it was part of the curriculum. And the bottom left is that this young girl should be very concerned if she has a Jewish doctor. And then there was another misconception that there was this, it came from the something called the protocols, and there was a story that was written out of Russia that said that there was this hidden group of men who were, and they were all Jewish, and their plan was to take over the world economically and dominate, so that is a reflection of that theory that out there is this group that we all need to be concerned with. So if in fact we unite as Germans against Jews in any nation, we're protecting the world. So again, if you start to feed these thoughts to the general population, and especially to children, they're going to stand up and recognize that, okay, there's a concern here. On the back wall of the display case, you see the persecution of the Jews. So it started slowly, but eliminating jobs for Jews. There were the Nuremberg laws that removed citizenship from anyone who was Jewish and a German citizen, and you have to understand that Jews were part of Germany for generations and generations and were well embedded in society. So marking businesses so that people wouldn't go in. And then we have the destruction during an evening called Kristallnacht, where the Nazi Party came in and destroyed not only Jewish businesses, they burned synagogues to the ground, and they also went into private residences, and they would steal things, they would throw belongings out the windows, and they would terrorize women and children and take the men off to, so many men the following morning were sent to concentration camp, and their families had to struggle to try and get them out. Many of them didn't make it. The picture of the woman basically tells it all. The frustration of trying to get out of Germany was at many times impossible. Countries kept their doors closed. So anti-Semitism was global. So they would not allow entry of anyone who was Jewish. And it was actually the Swiss. On the front of the case, you'll see passports or ID cards. You had to have an ID card to move around just in the general population. But it was Switzerland that said, please stamp those passports with a large letter J in red, so that we don't really have to contemplate whether this person is Jewish or not. We'll know right away and we'll turn them away. In addition, everyone who was Jewish had their middle name changed, so that was the identifier when you opened that passport. So if you were a male, your middle name was changed to Israel. If you were a woman, it was changed to Sarah. So that no one could possibly pass through without being identified. Again, the yellow stars in every nation, in France, in Italy, every nation had their own yellow star, which had to be worn on your clothing when you were outdoors. In some nations, Poland, it had to be on the front and the back. In Poland, there was an armband that actually had a Star of David on it. Jews had to purchase those. They were something that you had to purchase and you had to wear. And we always talk, the right-hand photograph is about the evening of Kristallnacht when all of these synagogues were burned down. We talk about, with the suitcase, the journey of the St. Louis, which was a group of Jews who left Europe on a ship, basically something like a small cruise ship that we're familiar with today. They left knowing that they all had visas to get into Cuba. Everything was validated, they sold their businesses, everything. They came over here with what little they had left in a suitcase, only to arrive in Havana, and Havana to say, we have revoked all of your visas. So we have 350 individuals on this ship, not allowed to disembark. Many had family members who already lived in Cuba, and that was how they got the visas. They did this for several days. They petitioned the United States. They could actually see from their ship, they could see the lights of Miami. So they petitioned the United States. And one would think, a small group of people, what harm could it possibly do? But we as a nation revoked them to enter our country. All of them were returned. There were 4 countries, England, France, Belgium, I'll have to remember the other one, which said, come back to Europe, we'll accept you, you don't have to go back to Germany. But what happens is then the occupation of the Nazis had moved to these nations, and many of those people who had done this journey ended up going back, ended up being sent to concentration camps and killed, because now they were in a nation that was occupied by the Nazis.
There was a movie about that.
Yes, there are several. Voyage of the Damned is one of them. So if you'll move this way with me, I really don't, and I'll step out of the way for this one. I really don't like to highlight a lot of Hitler and his work, but he was the one consistent person who was driving this force. But he couldn't have done so, and we always have to remember that. He could not have, as you can see, these are all children. This is the Hitler Youth. He could not have amassed such a following unless there were other people that chose to think like he did. So this is a rally of German youth. And again, they started with the younger, because Hitler's theory was that the older generation would die off, and he would already have prepared the youth of Germany to be his followers. His goal was to take all children away from their families and to look at Hitler as the father of the nation, and also the one that would tell them what to do. So part of the policy of the Hitler Youth was that the children were taught that they could go home, and if there was someone in their family that was talking against Hitler, they would come back and report that, even if it was an uncle or an aunt or someone. And they had special broadcasts on the radio that were directed specifically to the Hitler Youth, and they in turn would listen to propaganda that made them feel so superior to the rest of the world and engaged with Hitler and his philosophy. And I'm done. I'm moving down. An example, Der Stürmer, on the back of this case, is another example of publications that were directed to disgrace and stereotype the Jewish population. So if you can move down, I'm going to have to talk a little bit lower, so if you can get closer in. Next case is dehumanization, ghettoization, and resistance. So once you've identified all of the Jews, and they all have to carry some type of ID that says they're Jewish, wear the Jewish star. Now that you've got them identified, now you need to continue the dehumanization process, relinquish their jobs, can no longer go to a park and even sit on a bench, can't go to movie theaters, can't go into restaurants, hotels, any of those. And everywhere throughout Germany there are signs that say, no Jews allowed. That's the dehumanization. Impossible. The Jewish women were allowed to shop for food after 3 o'clock. By after 3 o'clock, all the food was gone. So they were trying to say to the world, we're treating the Jews just like we're treating everyone else. They just have different rules of when they can do certain things. But in reality, that meant that they couldn't get the food. So quality of life, if you were part of an extended family, you would move in with your family because it was safer. And once your apartment was abandoned, they would no longer rent to Jews. So if you were thrown out of an apartment building, you really didn't have the luxury of finding another apartment. You had to rely on family and friends to take you in. Ghettoization is the next step. We need to put all of the Jews in concentrated areas, which were called ghettos. So we bring them all into these tiny areas. We cut off the resources of sewer and electric and things like this, hoping that loss of life would happen naturally, is what they called it, but through disease, through the fact that people couldn't stay as clean as they normally had, through the lack of food and proper nutrition, people would die off. So that was part of the plan. The other was that once you've ghettoized them, you know where they are. The next step, although it hasn't been announced, the next step is going to be that now we move them to the concentration camps. It wasn't until 1942 that they came up with the finalization, which involved the gassing and the crematoriums, and there were it's a misconception that every concentration camp was a death camp. There were 6 death camps, and their only intention was to murder. So as soon as the trains arrived, women and children and the elderly were marched right into the gas chambers. And if you were a young woman and you looked like that you could work, then you were sent to a work detail. Same thing for men, young men, especially those who seemed that they had the capacity to do hard work, were shipped off to a work detail. Everyone else was directly sent to the gas chambers. A work detail was not, a work detail was survival. If you had a work detail, then you knew that you were at least going to live for another day. In this case, we talk about, now, the deportations is once you've closed a ghetto, you're going to take all the inhabitants and you're going to ship them to a camp. There were work camps where everyone in that camp worked, mostly on building roads, building railroad tracks, working in quarries, sewing uniforms, putting together guns and ammunition, all for the Nazis. And those were concentrated. Then there were transit camps. They couldn't decide where they were going to send you, but they wanted to hold on to you because they knew that you had some kind of talent. Being a watchmaker, being able to play a musical instrument. In every concentration camp, there was what they called an orchestra made up of Jews who knew how to play instruments. That kept them alive because when people disembarked from the trains, they wanted them to think that this was normal, that everything was okay. So if they played German music or played something from a composer that people were familiar with, it would keep them calm and people wouldn't get frantic. So the banjo there is a reflection of that ability to stay alive. People would be rounded up at train stations, and they're telling that they're going to be relocated. So they used a lot of language that made people think that, okay, it's going to be better. It's going to keep getting better. And there was a large group of Jewish resistance who really don't get recognition. Women were a huge part of this. Women could actually travel and disguise themselves as Poles or as other ethnicities. Men at any given time on the street, if someone questioned whether they were Jewish or not, they were told to lower their pants. There was no hiding from the fact that they were circumcised. With women, and especially with Polish women, they knew the language, they were able to portray themselves as Christians. They had a support system that would help them. So they were the ones that moved ammunition and a lot of the weapons, sent messages, were able to board trains and get messages to other people. They were a huge part of this system. So if you move down, I'm sorry, if you'll move down this way, we can't all fit in this corner, but I can explain to you what it's about. We have and all of the artifacts in this museum. This is the only Holocaust museum in the state of New Jersey. So while we're small, we're very proud of the fact. And most of our artifacts have come from our local community. They've been donated by survivors and family members who feel that this is an important place to keep these mementos. One of our community, Dr. Robert Fisher, had managed to escape. He was in Czechoslovakia, and when Hitler came in and the Nazis came in, they quickly closed the doors. So being able to get out of that nation was remarkable. He got out, but his cousin and his aunt and his grandmother did not. He didn't find out until the year 2000, taking a trip back to Prague, went to a museum that was about the Holocaust, and one of these paintings, his daughter noticed that it was his cousin's name, and she said, "Dad, I think this is your cousin." And he said, "No, it couldn't be." Looking at the images, though, he saw his grandparents' house, and he started recognizing familiar things. So they went to the curator, and the curator brought them into the back, and they had many, many, many more of her drawings. Her drawings are in books, but I'll give you one example. And again, these are all children. So the art teacher, Friedel Brandeis, decided when she knew she was being shipped to Theresienstadt, which was another concentration camp, she packed 2 suitcases filled with art supplies because she knew the children would need some type of education, and she wanted to be part of that. So this is an example. There's on the edge of Theresienstadt, there was a river, and there was a crematorium on site, and they would have the children, when they were coming in, the Red Cross was scheduled to come in and look at Theresienstadt. The Germans fixed up a small portion of it and made it this beautiful model as if the entire place looked like that. And the route that the Red Cross was going to take was about 4 blocks. So they beautified that area. But they had all these ashes from the crematorium. So they were going to put them into paper bags and just leave them in the crematorium and tell the Red Cross that these were people that had died from natural causes, from disease, and that this was their ashes and they were going to return them to the family. But in reality, they realized they had so many ashes, they had to get rid of them. So the children took these bags of ashes, and as you can see, the reflection of a painting of a child, where a child on this side of the river, you can see how the river is gray So this was the children dumping the ashes into the river before the Red Cross arrived so that they could get rid of this evidence and make this look like a model area where the Jews were living. And the Jews, the Nazis actually made a film reflecting all this beautification they had done, and it was called Hitler Gives the Jews a Home. And they were going to use that again as propaganda because they didn't want it widespread, the atrocities that were happening. One of the funny parts of that filming was that children had to be filmed because they were also residents in this camp. So they would dress the children up. The children were all bathed. They were put in lovely clothing. And they were also given a piece of bread with butter. What the Nazis didn't recognize, that these children were starving. So as soon as they were handed the bread and butter, they ate it as quickly as they possibly could because they knew it would be taken away. So when the Nazis were finally positioned and had all the children where they wanted them, all the bread was gone. So they had to redistribute, and they really had a hard time. The children were not going to wait. Children were wise enough to know that this may slip from my hand, and I'm not taking that chance. So the children actually made the filming difficult. On the one side of this panel, and you can move in here when I'm done, is, we constantly use, ever since the end of World War II, we use the terminology never again, but that's not true. And even today, there are genocides happening. And as far as the Holocaust is concerned, we have Holocaust denial. And there are people throughout the world, and that's their job. They deny that the Holocaust ever happened. They dispute all of the facts. They dispute the fact that there were crematoriums, that there were gas chambers, and that in the Middle East has spread to something that is taught in the schools. So anti-Semitism is something that's taught, and again they bring up these protocols saying that there is this group that's going to take over the world, so we need to be on full alert. So we want people to know that even though that's a lovely phrase, it takes people of the upcoming generation to make sure that that happens. So I'm going to move in here, if you don't mind. So if you can just squeeze around the corner. It's really important that when we talk to students, and we bring a lot of schools into the Goodwin Holocaust Museum, as well as take programs out to schools. I've been to probably 4 high schools in the past 2 weeks, bringing programs to them, making sure that children are proactive in making their school one where bullying isn't accepted and that there is always diversity and honor to that diversity. But we make sure within the museum that we honor those who stood up and did the right thing and helped either Jews escape or, in Schindler's case, helped them survive within the system and kept them alive. So we have examples throughout the case of individuals who stood up and did something righteous, and they're called righteous rescuers. My favorite is Irena Sendler, and not because she's a woman, but because she really used her job in order to rescue children. And she was outside, she was Polish, she was Christian, she was outside of the Warsaw Ghetto, and she could see what was happening, but she was a social worker, so she had access to get into the ghetto because she went in on the fact that there was disease and they needed to keep the disease controlled. So she worked with a group called Zagota, and she went into the ghetto trying to convince parents, and I'm sure many of you are grandparents and grandparents, trying to convince those parents to turn their children over to her. When I go to the root of being a mom and a grandmom, I think, wow, how convincing she must have been. But she thought that it was the only hope for the children, because the children weren't being nourished. They were going to be the first to perish from disease and conditions. So and then what the Nazis would do would be, while the parents were doing work during the day, they would sneak in and round up the children, load them onto trucks, and transport them out while the parents didn't know. So you can't even imagine that horror. So she went in and she said to the parents, I will keep their identity. I'll make sure that I keep all the records of who they were, who their parents were, extended family, and I will place them with Christian families until this is over. Once it's over, the children will be returned to family members, their identity reinstituted. So she would go into the ghetto. She would set this up ahead of time, and she would go into the ghetto often. And she would go in several ways, but normally in a truck, sometimes in a van, a medical van. In order to get the children out, if they were of age and you could tell them that this was a dangerous trip, of course they'll be quiet. But then she took out infants and very small toddlers, so they had to be drugged in some way. Some of them went out in trash cans, some of them went out in caskets. She had to hide them in any way she could. But she took advantage of a dog, and she put the dog in the front seat with the driver and herself, and the dog was trained to bark whenever he saw a Nazi in uniform. So when they would get to the perimeter and the gates would have to be lifted, the dog would go crazy, and the guards usually said, they knew her face, they just said to her, keep moving. They didn't want to deal with the dog. That allowed her to get the children out. She did place all of them. All of them were safe, so she saved 1,500 children. She, in fact, was identified and sent to jail. Both of her legs were broken. She was really ready to be sentenced to death and at that time, someone from her organization, Zagoda, managed to get into the prison, and she escaped. But what happened was, after the war, now Poland is taken over by the Russians, and she is considered someone of concern because she aided, and she was in jail, she aided all of these families. But she buried she wrote the names and the family information on cigarette papers, and she put them, back then milk was distributed in big, huge metal cans, and she would put all of the names and the family information on these papers, and she knew there was nowhere safe, so she actually buried it, and someone else knew where it was in case something happened to her. She did survive the war, and she was actually up for the Pulitzer Peace Prize against Al Gore, but Al Gore won. I'm still upset about that. But she's a remarkable woman, and we have plenty of other people who stepped up. The Jewish Remembrance Museum, Yad Vashem, in Israel, honors righteous rescuers, which means you didn't do it for profit. You did it just because you knew it was the right thing to do. So not everyone. That's questionable, because some people needed the money that was given to them in order to feed the individuals that they were housing, but that is their criteria. And the quilt behind you are all of our community members, and you know yourself that if you were involved in something as horrific as the Holocaust, you would not want to be remembered emaciated coming out of the war afterwards, and all of our survivors want to be remembered in happier days with family members. So that's what this quilt is all about. And you may recognize someone, some of our survivors still speak for us, go out to schools, and really, really make a difference with the generation that is in our schools today. So I'm going, if you can shift to your right, we'll go down to that next case. Arrived at not only the concentration camps, but the death camps to reveal what was actually going on. There were stories that had manifested. It was printed in the New York Times. It wasn't that it was not known, but it was well hidden in the newspapers. So our liberators were so important in making sure that aid was given. And remember, soldiers aren't trained to come in and liberate a camp and then take on social issues and medical issues of this magnitude. So they really had to go with common knowledge and just use common sense to be able to help the population that was in existence when they arrived. The case behind you is about this final solution that was decided in January of 42. And from that point forward till the end of the war, the goal of the Nazis was specifically to eliminate the Jewish population everywhere, not just because the plan was that they were going to come over and take over our country as well. So it was the Jewish population throughout the globe. This is an actual uniform. It was shoes. If you lost your shoes, you were in trouble, because if your foot was cut and an infection entered your body, that was the end of the beginning of the end. So shoes were critical. And then the second most important thing was your cup or your bowl. You got your coffee in that, and you got your soup. And if you didn't have that bowl, when it came time to serve food, you had nothing, you did not have a utensil to eat with. So that was critical. So that was something that people kept tied around their waist, somehow attached to their body, because even if it was snow, if you were out on a work detail, you could at least they were never, the entire duration of the time in camp, they were never given water, ever. So in July, when you're out there in this wool uniform, digging ditches, you can imagine, and in the winter, you didn't have a coat, so this was the only thing that kept you warm. And you can imagine how tattered it would get over the years if you managed to survive that length of time. So, critical resources. We have several things in this case. The doll, the image of the woman sewing, that came from Magna Watts, who till today still makes dolls, but it was her ability to make dolls that kept her alive. The officers in the concentration camp heard that she had that talent. They wanted to send dolls home to their children, so she was given a position not of privilege but of survival, just because she could make dolls and they wanted them. So that kept her alive. Some of our tools of destruction are on the bottom. It wasn't bad enough that you were starving to death and you were living in horrific conditions. Beating you was a common thing, and people were beat to death for absolutely no reason at all. So some of the horrors of what actually happened. And the case behind me is Crimes Against Humanity, highlighting the fact that genocide is still happening. There has been a genocide going on in Darfur in Africa for years. And even though there was a decision made by the UN that we would no longer allow genocide to happen, it has to be voted on by the population. And if they deny that it's a genocide, if they say it's a civil war, no one has to act. And that's become the situation in Rwanda. When that genocide happened, we had just gotten beyond Somalia, and it was a trauma for us as a nation. And as a nation, we chose not to help as millions were murdered. Well, 1 million of individuals were murdered by machete. We knew that it was happening. We had newscasters there broadcasting it, but we chose not to call it a genocide and not to step in. So our current president has acknowledged Darfur as a genocide, but then you get into the logistics of who's doing what, who's offering what. And we're really under a misconception of what the UN can do. The UN really is a peacekeeping entity. Their goal is not to go in and, be involved in a war. But we can't idly stand by while many of people are being murdered. So if you'll step into the hallway with me, I'll show you the end of our little tour. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
Do it outside?
All right, sure.
There was a movie also where they had the Jewish people counterfeiting money for them, so they...
Excellent film, and so true.
Yeah, wasn't it? They stayed alive by counterfeiting.
They did.
They did it so slowly, they were going to mess up the economy.
So we'll look at this wall. So if you can have your back to that wall. Someone in your group just mentioned the film The Counterfeiters, and it's a true story how Jews were taken and used to produce counterfeit. If we can just leave a opening there so people can get in and out, actually were used to counterfeit. It was Nazis' plan to reproduce the money of the world, and they were very close to producing U.S. currency before the end of the war. But it's a fascinating film and true. So I'll briefly talk to you about this, and then I'll take any questions that you have. So when we bring our students in, we want them to recognize geography is not a huge topic taught in schools anymore, so we want them to understand where this was taking place, and you need to understand the Nazi domination and how far-reaching it was during this time period. From our U.S. Holocaust Museum, a picture of liberation at 45, and you can see, you don't have to bend over. We talk about the population and how many were murdered, 6 million, but we have the breakdown here of where that happens. Please come by. And then you can walk right through. Everything was saved at these camps. So they saved clothing, they saved shoes, they pulled gold teeth. Anything that was buried in, women used to put jewelry sewn into the hems of their clothing. They found all of it, and they had an area where they sorted all of this, and the plan was to reuse it and send it back to Germany. You see the picture of the suitcases? This word relocation, the word relocation was believed. So people wrote their names, where they were from, on their luggage because they were told that they could pack one bag. They really felt that they were being relocated somewhere else. And certainly. So I just want to leave a couple minutes so that I can answer your questions, or if you have any questions about the identification poster here shows the different type of ID that was worn and the triangle. You could be in a concentration with not only Jews, but criminals from other nations as well. So questions? Someone? Yes.
Just general questions, and they're not really political. Does the Holocaust Museum serve as a watchdog for what's going on today in the world? Like speaking up against that? They mentioned Darfur, maybe Serbia, maybe other places.
Yes.
Do they serve as a spokesman other than an individual to speak out against that?
Because the Holocaust happened so long ago, we find that children are disengaging from this because it was old history. But when they come through our museum, it brings to light the fact that this started with hatred. And they're used to hatred. I mean, there's hatred in our schools, and there is bullying and unkindness, and it brings it to a new level of how it can grow. So the message here is that the Holocaust happens because the world let it happen.
Here's a question, because you're coming from, you mentioned you're a university professor. So in universities around the world, and here in the U.S., there's a tremendous streak of anti-Semitism, anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish on the campuses and in the professorships. I mean, is everybody aware of what's going on in our campuses today?
Well, I would say no.
Demonization. And also the second question is, they stripped all the guns away from Jews. If the Jews had guns, there wouldn't be so many, cases of dead Jews in towns or establishments. And the third was demonization. Today in our country, we're demonizing the successful, those who are wealthy. And these are all, to me, it's all steps towards something bigger, or could be bigger. And I thought, the Holocaust Society, Museum Society would watch this and say, listen, we're smelling, wind here, which is not right.
Yes. So to address that, we do partner with many organizations so that we are on top of things. Organizations will come to us and say, we have a student or we have a group of students who are leaning in a certain direction, one that is not a good one. We'll work with those students. We'll bring them in here. We'll tell them our story. The most powerful thing we do is have students sit down with survivors. That window of opportunity is closing as I speak. that's the most powerful. But to bring them in here and to let them understand that if you create a storybook, if you create a magazine and people start reading it, of course they're going to believe it. The power of propaganda, the power of hatred, the power of not only the written word, the spoken word. So enlightenment and awareness is our only tool. So education, yes, is key. And is there bias on campus? You bet there is. And because we live in a state where teaching the Holocaust is mandated, we have more schools that offer courses that will help keep that at a minimum. But in other states, that's not the case. If I go into Philadelphia into a school to teach the Holocaust, they don't even understand what that word is. So again, education is key, and we do it as often as we can and try to make a difference. Did anyone else have a question? Did I address all your questions?
Just a comment on what you were saying, which was, besides thank you for a wonderful tour.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Is, unfortunately, there's a thing called history is doomed to repeat itself.
Yes.
Hopefully not to this extent.
But what I can tell you is what I see with high school and younger students today is hope. They get it. They truly get it. And there's a huge group that is working to make sure that it doesn't continue. So my hope is in them, and we need to support their efforts.
What's the youngest grade level that you present?
We have two things. We have a reading program that we go into schools and read from kindergarten up. It's obviously not about the Holocaust, but it is about cooperation, tolerance, diversity, sharing. So we start very young. Teaching about the Holocaust usually isn't before fourth grade, and at fourth grade it's very minimal. But if you start introducing the concept of groups being marginalized, and that happens to elementary school children, they get that, they understand. And if we start to plant that seed early on, that when we go back in 7th and 8th grade, they're really attuned to what we have to deliver. And it's our high school students, I'm noticing, that are really putting together clubs and organizations and doing service work. And they really, at that point in time, while it's a select few, I can't say that it's the entire school population, I can say that those groups have expanded over the past 5 years by a great extent. So I am hopeful. You have to hope. Absolutely, yes.
You go into the Cherry Hill schools?
Yes, yes. We really try to react to any request that's given to us, and we have volunteers like myself that just go out into the school system, and we'll either facilitate a program, we'll bring a survivor with us, we'll do something to help that school out, because if they reach out to us, they do need the help, and we want to be there.
Have you ever had a Muslim school come here?
Yes, yes. We have diverse groups. It's very surprising. We put on plays. We have all kinds of programs where schools can bring their entire population or a small group. And yes, there is diversity and a lot of interaction, which is wonderful, because to get that dialogue started at an early age is critical. Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. It was a pleasure.